The dust on Samuel Zane's boots had gathered so thick, it looked like he'd walked all the way from Texas to Arizona territory without stopping, and in truth, he nearly had. The cemetery outside Gila Bend sat on a gentle slope where the desert seemed to hold its breath, the only sound being the occasional whisper of wind through the sparse juniper trees that offered meager shade to the dead. It was a bright April morning in 1878, and the sun had barely cleared the eastern mountains when Samuel dismounted from his chestnut mare. His shoulders, once square and proud, now curved inward as if permanently bent by grief. He removed his weathered Stetson, revealing lines etched deep around his eyes and silver threading through his dark hair, despite being only 32 years old. The small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand had been carefully gathered from the creek beds he'd passed, wrapped in a damp handkerchief to keep them fresh in the desert heat. Samuel moved with deliberate steps between the wooden markers until he reached one that, though less than a year old, already showed signs of weathering from the harsh Arizona elements. "Mourning, Elizabeth," he whispered, kneeling before the grave of his wife. "Sorry it's been a spell. Trail's been hard." His fingers traced the carved letters of her name, Elizabeth Ann Zane, gone at the tender age of 28 from a fever that had swept through Gila Bend like wildfire the previous summer. They'd been married just shy of 5 years, their dreams of children and a future dying with her. "Got these for you," Samuel said, arranging the wildflowers at the base of the marker. "Desert Mariposa lilies, always were your favorite." As he spoke softly to the silent grave, Samuel became aware of another presence in the cemetery. 20 yards away, a woman knelt before a grave much like he did, her head bowed in prayer or conversation with the departed. Her dark dress billowed slightly in the breeze, and her hair, the color of honey, was partially visible beneath a simple black bonnet. Samuel returned to his quiet communion with Elizabeth, telling her of the cattle drive he'd just completed, of the new buildings going up in town, of how the general store now carried those peppermint sticks she'd always favored. He spoke as if she might respond, a habit he couldn't break despite the months since her passing. When he finally fell silent, the weight of finality settling over him once more, Samuel noticed the other mourner was still present. Something in her posture, the slight tremor of her shoulders, the way her hand pressed against the wooden cross spoke of fresh grief, raw and consuming. Before he quite realized what he was doing, Samuel gathered half of the wildflowers from Elizabeth's grave. "Don't mind, do you, Lizzie?" he murmured. "You always did have a generous heart." Samuel approached the woman slowly, not wanting to startle her. When he was a few paces away, he cleared his throat softly. "Beg pardon, madam," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Thought you might like some of these for your loved one." The woman turned, and Samuel found himself looking into eyes the color of a summer sky, reddened from tears but striking nonetheless. She couldn't have been more than 25, with a delicate face that grief had somehow failed to diminish. "That's very kind," she replied, her voice barely audible. She hesitated before accepting the flowers. "Thank you, Mr. Zane, Samuel Zane," he supplied, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't mean to intrude on your mourning. Not at all." She glanced down at the flowers, then back at Samuel. "I'm Nora Miller." Samuel nodded toward the grave marker. "Your husband?" Pain flickered across her face. "Yes, Thomas. It's been 3 months now." Samuel's eyes drifted to the marker where he could make out the inscription. "Thomas James Miller, 1850–1877, beloved husband." Samuel did the quick calculation. Thomas had been only 27. "I lost my Elizabeth last summer," Samuel offered quietly. "The fever." Nora's expression shifted to one of understanding. "Thomas was taken by outlaws. They robbed the stagecoach he was guarding. Shot him down when he tried to protect the passengers. Her voice was steady despite the tragic words. He'd only been working as a guard for 6 months. I'm sorry to hear that, Mrs. Miller. Samuel replaced his hat. Were you folks new to Gila Bend? Arrived last spring. Thomas had prospects with the stage company. We came from Missouri seeking opportunity. She arranged the wildflowers carefully against the marker. And now, I find myself alone in a town where I barely know a soul. Samuel nodded, understanding all too well the isolation that came with grief. It's a good town, despite its rough edges. People look after their own here. A small, sad smile touched Nora's lips. So I've heard. The Reverend's wife has been kind, inviting me to socials, but it's hard to accept charity. Not charity to accept neighborliness, Samuel replied. Elizabeth would say the same. They fell into a comfortable silence, two strangers connected by loss. After a moment, Samuel tipped his hat. I'll leave you to your visit, Mrs. Miller. May you find some peace today. And you as well, Mr. Zane, she replied. As Samuel walked back to his horse, he felt Elizabeth's presence strongly, almost as if she were nudging him. He turned back toward Nora Miller, who had returned to her quiet vigil. Mrs. Miller, he called softly. I'll be heading into town for supplies before heading back to my ranch. Would be honored to escort you when you're ready. Nora looked surprised, then grateful. That would be appreciated, Mr. Zane. I won't be much longer. Samuel nodded and went to wait with his mare, giving Mrs. Miller the privacy to finish her visit with her husband. As he stroked the horse's neck, he couldn't help but feel that Elizabeth would approve of his gesture. She had always been the one to reach out to newcomers in town, to offer comfort where needed. 20 minutes later, they rode toward Gila Bend. Samuel on his mare and Nora on a gentle bay gelding she said had been Thomas's pride. The town appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets that somehow constituted civilization in this harsh landscape. Your ranch, Nora ventured as they rode. Is it far from town? Half-day's ride southwest, Samuel answered. Nothing fancy. 100 head of cattle, some horses, enough to keep me busy. You manage it alone, Samuel nodded. Hired hands during roundup and branding. Rest of the time it's just me and the critters. He paused. Elizabeth used to keep a kitchen garden. Been letting it go to seed, I'm afraid. Nora's expression softened. Gardens were Thomas's domain, actually. He grew up on a farm and always said he'd have one again someday. Had started clearing ground behind our place just before. Her voice trailed off. What about you, Mrs. Miller? What are your plans now? Samuel asked gently. I've taken in some sewing work. The hotel needs linens mended, and Mrs. Peterson at the mercantile said she'd send alterations my way. Determination edged her voice. I won't be returning to Missouri. There's nothing for me there now. Samuel admired her resolve. Gila Bend could use more steady souls like yourself. As they entered town, Samuel noticed how Nora straightened her posture, put on a brave face for the townsfolk who nodded greetings. He recognized that facade all too well, the mask of composure that hid the hollow ache inside. They stopped first at the mercantile, where Samuel needed supplies. The store owner, Hiram Peterson, greeted them warmly. Samuel Zane, as I live and breathe, thought you might be pushing cattle up north by now. Not until next month, Hiram, Samuel replied, then gestured to his companion. You know Mrs. Miller? Indeed I do, Hiram said, smiling kindly at Nora. My wife speaks highly of your needlework, madam. Nora acknowledged the compliment with a slight nod. Mrs. Peterson has been very generous with her referrals. As Samuel gathered his supplies, coffee, flour, bacon, ammunition, he watched Nora examining a bolt of blue calico fabric with longing eyes before she moved on without purchasing anything. When he paid for his goods, He quietly added a length of the calico to his order, tucking it into his saddlebag before Nora could notice. Their next stop was the post office, where Nora needed to check if any letters had arrived from her family back east. Samuel waited outside, nodding to passers-by he recognized. When Nora emerged, her expression was unreadable. "Bad news?" he inquired cautiously. "No news at all," she replied. "Which I suppose is better than a letter asking when I'll come to my senses and return home." Samuel chuckled at her candor. "Families can be well-meaning but misguided." "Your family isn't pressing you to remarry or move back east?" Nora asked. "No family to speak of," Samuel admitted. "Orphaned young. It was just Elizabeth and me." Nora's eyes softened with understanding. "I'm sorry." "No need," Samuel assured her. "I made my own way, as you're doing now." They completed their errands, and Samuel noticed it was approaching midday. "Mrs. Miller, would you do me the honor of joining me for a meal at the hotel restaurant? I've been eating my own cooking for months, and it would be nice to have civilized company." Nora hesitated, clearly weighing propriety against the simple pleasure of companionship. "I wouldn't want to cause gossip, Mr. Zane." "In a town this size, breathing causes gossip," Samuel said with a small smile. "But if it concerns you, we can invite Reverend Bradley and his wife to join us. They're usually taking their dinner about now." Relief crossed Nora's face. "That would be lovely, thank you." The meal was simple but hearty: beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Conversation flowed more easily with the Reverend and his wife present, acting as a buffer against any awkwardness between Samuel and Nora. They discussed the town's plans for Independence Day celebrations, the progress on the new schoolhouse, and the unseasonable warmth of the spring. As they finished their meal, Reverend Bradley mentioned that the church needed new curtains for the windows. "The sun has bleached the old ones something fierce," he explained. "Mrs. Miller is quite skilled with a needle," Samuel found himself saying. "Perhaps she could help with that project." Nora looked surprised at his recommendation but didn't contradict him. Mrs. Bradley brightened immediately. "Oh, would you, dear? We could pay you fairly, of course." "I'd be happy to," Nora agreed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time that day. "It would be nice to contribute something to the church." When the meal concluded and they prepared to part ways, Samuel hesitated before pulling the blue calico from his saddlebag. "Mrs. Miller, I noticed you admiring this earlier. Thought it might be useful for your sewing projects." Nora's eyes widened. "Mr. Zane, I couldn't possibly consider it payment in advance," he interrupted gently. "For mending a shirt or two of mine that's seen better days. If you're willing, that is." Understanding dawned in her eyes. He was offering work, not charity. "I'd be happy to mend your shirts, Mr. Zane," she said, accepting the fabric with grace. As Samuel prepared to depart for his ranch, he found himself reluctant to leave. "Mrs. Miller, I'll be bringing some cattle to the stockyards next Wednesday. Would it be forward to call on you then? Perhaps you'll have those shirts ready by then." Nora considered him for a moment, her expression guarded but not unwelcoming. "That would be acceptable, Mr. Zane. I live in the small house behind the cooper's shop." "Until Wednesday, then," Samuel said, tipping his hat before mounting his horse. As he rode out of town, he couldn't help but feel that something had shifted inside him, like a door long closed had been nudged ajar. The week passed in a blur of ranch work, mending fences, checking on new calves, breaking a spirited colt. Yet Samuel found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Nora Miller, to her quiet dignity in the face of loss, to the gentle way she had arranged those wildflowers on her husband's grave. When Wednesday arrived, Samuel took extra care with his appearance, trimming his beard and donning a clean shirt before driving a small herd of cattle to the stockyards. After concluding his business, he collected a package from the mercantile, a set of garden seeds he'd ordered before making his way to the small house behind the cooper's shop. Nora answered his knock promptly, looking surprised but pleased to see him. "Mr. Zane, right on time. Please come in." Her home was modest but immaculately kept, with simple furnishings and touches of femininity in the embroidered cushions and curtains. The scent of fresh bread hung in the air. "I've mended your shirts," Nora said, indicating a neatly folded stack on the table. "The blue one needed new buttons, but I happened to have some that matched perfectly." "Much obliged, Mrs. Miller," Samuel replied, placing payment beside the shirts. "And I brought something for you. A small token." She opened the package of seeds with curiosity, then looked up at him with questioning eyes. "Vegetable seeds. You mentioned Thomas had started a garden," Samuel explained. "Thought you might want to finish what he began. In his memory." Emotion flickered across Nora's face: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper. "That's very thoughtful, Mr. Zane." "Samuel," he corrected gently. "If you don't mind." A small smile. "Samuel, and you must call me Nora." They shared coffee and fresh bread while discussing the town's happenings. Nora told him about the church curtains she was making, and Samuel spoke of a mountain lion that had been troubling his livestock. The conversation flowed naturally, without the awkwardness of their first meeting. As Samuel prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "Nora, there's a social at the church this Saturday evening. Would you consider attending with me? As friends," he added quickly, not wanting to presume. Nora's cheeks colored slightly. "I haven't been to a social since Thomas." "Might be good to step back into the world a bit," Samuel suggested. "Elizabeth always said isolation was poison to the soul." "Your Elizabeth sounds like she was wise," Nora said softly. "She was," Samuel agreed, "and she would have liked you very much." After a moment's consideration, Nora nodded. "I'll go to the social with you, Samuel. As friends." The social was a simple affair, music provided by local musicians, tables laden with potluck dishes, children running between the adults' legs. Samuel arrived at Nora's door with a sense of nervous anticipation he hadn't felt in years. She answered wearing the blue calico, fashioned into a modest but becoming dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her honey-colored hair was arranged neatly, with small white flowers tucked into the braid that crowned her head. "You look lovely," Samuel said sincerely. "Thank you," Nora replied, a blush touching her cheeks. "I almost didn't come, put on the dress and took it off twice before deciding." "I'm glad you decided in favor," Samuel said, offering his arm. At the social, they were greeted warmly by townsfolk who seemed genuinely pleased to see Nora out and about. Several women complimented her dress, and Reverend Bradley made a point of praising the new church curtains she had completed. As the evening progressed, Samuel found himself watching Nora, the way she laughed at the schoolmaster's jokes, how she knelt to comfort a child who had fallen, the graceful movement of her hands as she served lemonade. She was coming alive before his eyes, emerging from the shell of grief that had encased her. When the fiddler struck up a lively tune, Samuel surprised himself by asking, "Would you care to dance, Nora?" Uncertainty crossed her face. "I haven't danced since." "Neither have I," Samuel admitted. "Might step on your toes." That made her smile. "Well, these shoes are sturdy enough." They joined the other couples on the makeshift dance floor, moving somewhat stiffly at first, then with increasing confidence as the music carried them along. By the third dance, Nora was laughing as Samuel twirled her, her skirts swirling around her ankles. "I'd forgotten how this feels," she confessed breathlessly when they paused for refreshment. "To dance?" Samuel asked. "To enjoy something without guilt," Nora clarified. "To feel happy even for a moment and not immediately think I'm betraying Thomas's memory." Samuel nodded in understanding. Took me 7 months before I could laugh at a joke without feeling like I was dishonoring Elizabeth. Grief is a peculiar companion. That it is, Nora agreed softly. As they walked home under the star-filled desert sky, a comfortable silence settled between them. At Nora's door, Samuel resisted the urge to linger. "Thank you for a pleasant evening," he said, tipping his hat. "Thank you for persuading me to go," Nora replied. She hesitated, then added, "I planted those seeds you gave me, behind the house where Thomas had cleared the ground." Samuel smiled. "I'd like to see that garden sometime." "Anytime," Nora said, and Samuel believed she meant it. Spring melded into summer, and their friendship deepened through small, meaningful interactions. Samuel found reasons to come to town more frequently, cattle to sell, supplies to purchase, church services to attend. Each visit included time with Nora, whether it was sharing a meal, helping with her garden, or simply walking through town together. In early July, as Gila Bend prepared for Independence Day celebrations, Samuel arrived at Nora's home with an unexpected proposal. "I'm driving cattle to the northern ranges next week," he explained as they sat on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. "It's a 2-month journey there and back. I've hired 3 hands to help, but I'm concerned about leaving the ranch house empty for so long." Nora looked at him curiously. "Surely that's happened before." "It has," Samuel acknowledged. "But this year there have been reports of rustlers in the area. I'd rest easier knowing someone was there, keeping an eye on things." He took a breath. "I was wondering if you might consider staying at the ranch while I'm gone. There's a steady stream from the mountains, good soil for your gardening, and plenty of room." Nora's eyes widened. "Samuel, people would talk. A widow staying at a widower's ranch alone." "You'd have Dolores Rodriguez for company," Samuel quickly explained. "She cooks for the ranch hands during roundup and branding. She's agreed to stay on while I'm gone. Her reputation in the county is beyond reproach. She's nearly 60 and has 7 grown children." Relief softened Nora's features. "That's different then." She considered the offer. "My lease here ends next month anyway, and the Cooper needs the house for his new apprentice." Determination settled in her expression. "Yes, I'll watch over your ranch, Samuel." "It's the least I can do after all your kindness." Samuel nodded, concealing his delight behind a practical tone. "Good. I'll arrange for a wagon to bring you and your belongings out next Monday." The day of Samuel's departure arrived hot and clear. He'd spent the previous days showing Nora around the ranch the daily routines, where everything was kept, which horses needed special attention. Now, as the cattle lowed impatiently and the cowhands made final preparations, Samuel found himself reluctant to leave. Nora stood on the porch, watching the activity with interest. She'd already begun transforming the neglected kitchen garden, and fresh curtains hung in the windows of the ranch house. "You'll be careful?" she asked as Samuel mounted his horse. "Always am," he assured her. 2 months will pass before you know it." Nora handed him a package wrapped in oilcloth, some biscuits and jerky for the trail, and— She hesitated, then pulled a folded handkerchief from her pocket. "I made this for you." Samuel unfolded it to find his initials neatly embroidered in the corner, surrounded by tiny desert flowers like those he'd given her at the cemetery. "So you won't forget your way home," Nora said softly. Samuel carefully tucked the handkerchief into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "I couldn't forget if I tried, Nora." Their eyes held for a long moment before Samuel tipped his hat and turned his horse toward the waiting herd. As he rode away, he glanced back once to see Nora still standing on the porch, her hand raised in farewell. The cattle drive was arduous, scorching days, cold nights, dust that seemed to work its way into every crevice of man and beast alike. Yet Samuel found himself more at peace than he'd been since Elizabeth's passing. Each evening, as he made camp beneath the vast canopy of stars, he would take out Nora's handkerchief, running his thumb over the embroidered flowers, and allowing himself to hope for a future he'd thought forever closed to him. Letters reached him at predetermined points along the trail, simple accounts of life at the ranch, written in Nora's neat hand. She wrote of a fox that had tried to raid the henhouse, of wildflowers blooming after a rare summer rain, of vegetables thriving in the kitchen garden. Between the lines, Samuel read contentment, perhaps even happiness. 2 months stretched to 10 weeks due to unexpected delays, and when Samuel finally returned to his ranch in late September, he feared Nora might have given up on him and returned to town. Instead, as he crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, he saw smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney. The yard was swept clean, the corral mended, and to his amazement, a profusion of autumn flowers bordered the path to the house. Before he could dismount, the door opened and Nora stepped onto the porch. Her face lit up at the sight of him, and something in Samuel's chest tightened with emotion. "You're late, Samuel Zane," she called, but her smile belied any reproach in her words. "Got held up by early snow in the high country," he explained, swinging down from his weary horse. He stood for a moment, drinking in the sight of her hair loose around her shoulders, her cheeks flushed with pleasure or perhaps the heat from the kitchen stove. "You've been busy," he observed, gesturing to the flowers and the general air of care that surrounded the place. "Idle hands invite melancholy thoughts," Nora replied. "Besides, I found I enjoy ranch life more than I expected." She hesitated. "I've kept your room just as it was. Dolores helped me prepare the bunkhouse for you and your men tonight." Samuel understood her meaning. Propriety demanded he not sleep under the same roof with her now that he'd returned. "Thank you for thinking of that," he said, "though I admit I'm looking forward to my own bed again soon." "Soon," Nora agreed softly, and there was promise in her tone. That evening, after the ranch hands had been fed and settled in the bunkhouse, Samuel and Nora sat on the porch watching twilight descend over the desert. The air between them hummed with unspoken feelings. "I've been thinking," Samuel began carefully, "about the future." He turned to face Nora directly. "These past months with you here, the ranch has felt like a home again, not just a place where I work and sleep." Nora's eyes were steady on his face. "I've felt at home here too, Samuel." "Then stay," he said simply. "Not as my housekeeper or caretaker, but as my wife, if you'll have me." A soft gasp escaped Nora's lips. "Samuel, are you certain? It's been barely over a year since Elizabeth and 15 months since Thomas," Samuel finished gently. "I'll always love Elizabeth, just as you'll always hold Thomas in your heart, but I believe there's room in our hearts for new love too." He took her hand in his. "I've watched you bring my home and my spirit back to life, Nora. I want to build a future with you if you'll give me that chance." Tears shimmered in Nora's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel Zane." He drew her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that spoke of shared grief transformed into newfound joy. When they parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I should speak to Reverend Bradley soon." Nora nodded, her fingers twined with his. "We could ride into town tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Samuel agreed, savoring the word and all it promised. They were married on a crisp October day in 1879, the small church in Gila Bend filled with well-wishers. After the ceremony, as guests gathered for the celebration at the town hall, Samuel took Nora's hand. "There's somewhere we should go first," he said quietly, understanding immediately. Nora nodded. "Yes." They rode to the cemetery together. now husband and wife, each carrying a small bouquet of autumn wildflowers. Side by side, they knelt first at Elizabeth's grave, where Samuel spoke softly of his new happiness while acknowledging his enduring love for his first wife. Then they moved to Thomas's marker, where Nora whispered her own private words of remembrance and gratitude. As they prepared to leave, Samuel placed half his flowers on Elizabeth's grave and half on Thomas's. Nora did the same, the gesture a bridge between past and present, a blessing from those they had lost upon the love they had found. "They brought us together," Nora said softly as they walked hand in hand back to their horses. "That day in the cemetery." Samuel squeezed her hand. "I believe they would be happy for us." "I believe so too," Nora replied, her eyes bright with unshed tears and newfound joy. They rode back to town, to their wedding celebration and the beginning of their new life together. Behind them, the wildflowers nodded in the gentle desert breeze, a testament to love lost and found, to grief transformed into hope, to the unexpected blessings that can bloom even in the shadow of sorrow. In the years that followed, the Zane ranch prospered under their joint care. A son was born to them the following autumn, Thomas Samuel Zane, named for the men who had gone before. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Elizabeth Ann, carrying forward the memory of Samuel's first love. Each spring without fail, Samuel and Nora would ride to the cemetery in Gila Bend, children in tow as they grew old enough to lay wildflowers on the graves of their first spouses. It was a tradition that honored the past, while celebrating the present, a reminder that love, like the desert wildflowers after rain, could bloom more than once in a lifetime. And on quiet evenings, sitting on their porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Samuel would take Nora's hand and marvel at the journey that had brought them together, a chance encounter between a grieving cowboy and a mourning widow, and the simple act of sharing flowers that had changed their lives forever.